really happy to be here introducing Toby. I met Toby in Sheffield, actually just before both of us started to work in Cambridge. We were introduced by Professor Paul Hastad, and it was very curious because we were both there. Just I was finishing my own Marie Curie, and he was visiting because by then you were in Ankara, no? Or in Istanbul.
I was just in the process of coming to Cambridge at that, that week or so, I think.
yeah, that was just last minute. We met in Sheffield, and then we both moved at the same time to Cambridge, and there, well, we became quite close, and we started working together with Enrico Crema. We created the Cambridge CIDAL. It's a Cambridge Digital and Computational Archaeology Lab, and then we started working together in multiple projects. We have not finished any of them that I'm aware of, but yeah, we continue working on them.
Don't say that.
Yes, well, we will eventually. We will. So yeah, now okay. When I left Cambridge, Toby was also finishing his contract. Then it was extended to work with Professor Cyprian Broodbank in the McDonald, working with survey data from Kithira. And yeah, we thought it would be great to continue working together here with Marie Curie. He got it. He did an excellent application. So yeah, I mean it's a bit curious to be supervising Toby because it could be completely the opposite because he's a very senior researcher and an excellent researcher with lots of abilities. He's an excellent surveyor. He's really good with digital technologies, computational analysis, data analysis, remote sensing, GIS. He's also a champion of open access and reproductivity, sorry, and everything he does, you can find publicly available, the data, everything, and it's quite a unique researcher, and we are very proud to have him in India with us, working with us. Also, Toby is also a very international researcher. He has passed through the best universities. He did his BA in Oxford. He did a master then in UCL. His PhD in Sheffield with Sue Serrat and Andrew Serrat. He has been working in Mesopotamia, in Greece, in Turkey a lot. Then he moved with a postdoc to Cambridge, so he has passed through all the big universities. He has worked everywhere, and okay, his project it stems from his long-term interest in Mesopotamia, the Near East, but also in Turkey, Anatolia, the Western Mediterranean. And okay, he will explain in detail now, but yeah, it's also very much related with his PhD about long distance contacts, interactions, the emergence of complex societies, and how commerce, and in particular cloth commerce, helped to develop this early stage. So thank you, Toby, for being here, and I just let you speak.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. I'm not sure I could live up to that very generous description. Let me put on the share slide. Yeah, so first, I mean, obviously, I would like to say how glad I am to join ICARC. It's a great pleasure. I'd like to thank everyone for the very warm welcome I've received by the Institute and, of course, by the Landscape Archaeology Group. Despite the complications of the pandemic, which, of course, we've all been living. And today I'm very glad to share in brief my plans for research during my time here. I'll just apologise briefly to everyone who hasn't already heard this, but with impeccable timing, the neighbours have decided to do some building works next door. So if the sound cuts out, that might be the reason why. So I apologise in advance. Well, there it starts. So just to give you an outline of what I intend to talk about, so I first want to introduce the research background which framed the project that I want to work on here. Then I'll give you some background on why I came to this project and the questions and how they intersect with my different interests. And finally, I'll provide a brief outline of the sorts of things that my training and research will look like over the next couple of years in slightly more detail. Okay, so I hope you're all sitting comfortably, and I'll begin. Cloth makes the world go round. On birth, a human baby is wrapped in swaddling before he even feeds. On death, survivors must pick out the deceased's best clothes for her burial, cremation, and spiritual onward journey. Textiles are more than just the adornment and comfort of the body. They are simultaneously, and in fact paradoxically, both individual and social, both local and global, with far-reaching consequences for society. Now, the modern textile industry, through large-scale harvesting, manufacture and circulation of yarns, cloth and people, is a cornerstone of capitalist economic regimes and has a huge acknowledged impact on the environment and on society. This is a very stark picture in the bottom left here of the consequences of modern textiles. You see this huge landfill in Ghana from second-hand clothes which have been exported as recycling from Europe and the US. Accumulated archaeological and historical data hint at deep co-generative relationships between complex, particularly urban economies and textiles. The desire for cloth motivated trans-Eurasian connections via Central Asia and Iran. Here witnessed on the reliefs at Persepolis. And of course, ultimately, we see very many similar pictures across the Silk Road, the medieval Silk Road. I've just chosen this particular example of these Scythians carrying cloths to the Persian kings. The growing weaving and dyeing of fibres and textiles drove new political and social formations in the Mediterranean and the Near East. For example, in the second millennium Aegean, represented here from a Minoan wall painting. Now, last week's GEOP seminar, we saw the use of seashells, snail shells for making purple dyes. And here we have the collection of saffron. Probably the saffron itself is not very clear, but saffron have various uses, but one, of course, is as a red dye. In the 18th and 19th centuries AD, textiles were, in the form of cottons, exported initially from India, the irresistible lever by which peoples were wrenched from Africa to the Americas, only to be put to work as slaves to produce yet more cotton for export to Europe and to the new textile factories as part of the Industrial Revolution. There's this wonderful map of the impact on cotton trade of the American Civil War, and you can see the different stages here. And it's also just pointing to this great book, Empire of Cotton, which I can recommend anyone reading if you're interested in modern capitalism and the role of cotton in that. Now, the strange thing is textiles have been curiously written out of orthodox long-term histories and prehistories, particularly of human development. Our normalized historical vision of social evolution emphasizes utilitarian aspects of technology, particularly stone and metal tools. That's why we have the three ages, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. So why is this? Why have textiles been more or less left out? Well, obviously, in part, it's because the final textile products themselves are so perishable and hence archaeologically invisible. But I think insidiously, there are certain forms of labour, particularly high-status male work, which are subconsciously valorised as more important and authentic than others. And this applies. And so, for example, textiles is one of these ones which is less valued because of its status. And indeed, textile studies in academia itself have long been gendered as a sort of feminine pursuit, and thereby wrongly ranked as less important to the historical sciences. So the impact of cloth on the long-term economy and environment has too often been considered been sidelined or been considered ephemeral to what's really going on. And there's important work, for example, Barbara's women's work points this out. So there's really a critical need to develop innovative techniques to access the social and ecological impact of textile industries over the longue durée, over millennia. So why am I interested in these research questions? So I came to this topic primarily via interest in trade and ancient economy, and my doctoral research, which was published as book Tying the Threads of Eurasia in 2014, precisely aimed to document the evidence for Bronze Age precursors to the sort of large-scale trade networks we saw, such as the famous Silk Roads in Southwest Asia and Eurasia. And I was particularly interested in how computerized modeling of natural routes of movement could be melded with distributions of material culture to help to document and quantify the degree of route inertia or route dynamism, i.e. how much routes change. Very often in archaeological research, we claim that our studied site, the particular site that we're excavating or the particular region that we're studying, is on an important trade route. And while that's very often true, the actual fact itself is not very important in explaining large-scale dynamics unless we can somehow measure or compare the degree to which different sites are integrated into different trade routes at different times in the past. What you see here on the left is a map from that particular project, which is looking at the distribution of lapis lazuli across from Afghanistan into the Southwest Asia, so Mesopotamia and Anatolia. And the colours here are giving you an indication of the degree of difficulty to transport across that region. So the yellow is higher likelihood that you would find a route across there, and the green line is the sort of absolute least cost path, although this is problematic. It's something we can talk about if we want to at some other point. Now, one of the categories of traded materials from the Bronze Age that I eventually explored in this project was textiles. Now, we can't simply map the distribution of ancient textiles, ancient textile remains at least, since the number of surviving examples is so low. So it doesn't tell us an awful lot about the circulation of these items if we just put dots on a map, because there are relatively few of them. It doesn't tell you very much about the networks. But we know, however, from written sources that textile manufacture and textile trade was extremely important in these periods, in the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Western Asia. And for example, the old Assyrian merchants transported large amounts of cloth of different types from northern Mesopotamia to central Anatolia in exchange for silver, silver being the currency by which transactions were measured in Mesopotamia in that time, so the currency. And we know this because they left hundreds, if not thousands, of letters which documented this trade, and these letters are on tablets like the one that you see in the top right-hand corner here, written in cuneiform. They're fascinating if you ever get a chance to read them. Some of them are very personal. They're letters going backwards and forwards between merchant families on each side, talking about debts, talking about transfer of the actual quantities of textiles themselves, all sorts of interesting things. In many ways, looking very much like modern trading systems. The other thing is proxy and iconographic and skeuomorphic depictions, which show the elaboration of textile patterning in the same period, especially during the late 3rd and early 2nd millennium BC. For example, on seals and ceilings, and just a not very good quality picture, I'm afraid, but on the top left-hand corner, this is the imprint of a cylinder seal, and you can see a very distinctive type of dress on the clothing of the figures you see here. Which are distributed in certain ways, of course, and also on the surface of pottery, interesting enough. And so there's examples such as the vessels on the right-hand side here, which you can see the patterning is clearly inspired by a textile patterning, just the netting, the shapes, and so on. And you see this particularly in the second millennium BC across a very large area. So this trade in textiles, which we can clearly see documented, or even if it's very hard to see archaeologically, may have formed one of the earliest forms of industrialized value-added long-distance trade, precisely because of the portability of the product. And in some cases, textiles themselves could even have been used or been seen as a kind of alternative currency. This might be the case in early Bronze Age or Middle Bronze Age Anatolia, but we also see textiles being used as money, if you like, in other periods in history. And it's interesting to see that textiles were used as money on the eastern end of the Silk Roads in the medieval period. Possibly one example of the type of textile which is used in this way on the left, although we're not 100% certain. And what makes a currency for a particular society has some interesting consequences for how societies work. So this is something I'm also interested in. But I realized, however, there was a major lacuna in the study of the history of textiles, and namely the physical effects of textile industries on landscape. And this is obviously coming from my interest in landscape study in general and survey archaeology. All ancient textiles were made from yarns, which must be in some form or another grown either as plants or as animals, so wool or hair on sheep or some other animals as well, of course, before they're processed into textiles. And a great deal of archaeological attention has been placed on textile production, particularly on spinning, on weaving and dyeing. Spinning particularly, we have evidence for in terms of spindle wheels. There's been some effort on textile consumption, although it has to be said that's a low degree of investigation as a whole. But very little research is engaged on the ecology of textile industries. What are the long-term effects of domestication and increasing scale of yarn production through history? And this lacuna is strange when we consider the sheer environmental impact of textiles today. One of the most important of modern yarns, cotton, is also one of the most expensive in terms of environmental impact. So in the 20th century, we've seen huge water management projects which have been undertaken to facilitate the industrial scale irrigation of cotton plants. And for example, in this case, in Turkmenistan, it was actually initiated during the Soviet period, but it continues today. This massive canal building of to bring water to different parts of the desert across Turkmenistan. You can see the map across at the bottom here, and you can see the construction of it, top left, and how it looks on the right and the top bottom right there. Many have argued that this water footprint of what we might call broadly cotton capitalism or cotton imperialism is both environmentally as well as socially damaging in the long term. So an obvious question to ask is how far back do such impacts go? And the simple answer is we really don't know, because the study of textile and the study of landscape have rarely, if ever, been combined in a sustained way. What we need is a new set of approaches which combine existing and new methods of landscape study to try and describe these interrelationships which have previously not been considered. So, devising and testing new approaches is exactly what my Marie Curie research project aims to do over the next 2 years. So key things to examine as part of that will be firstly the types of landscapes that are used to grow certain types of yarn. What are the conditions of growth of different yarns? What would we expect to see? Secondly, looking for morphological signatures of yarn production. can we detect different types of yarn production in the past? What proxy indicators do we need? And related to that, of course, number 3 is identifying paleoenvironmental signatures which document particular yarn regimes. And we can think about, obviously, the pollen record and what that might say about the degree of pastoralism in certain regions at different times. And finally, looking at social environmental processes which are involved in yarn production. So what's going on around the different yarn productions. And obviously the expertise of ICARC members, particularly on pastoral landscapes, on remote sensing, on ancient environments, is really therefore of particular interest, and why I'm excited to be working on it here. And also the expertise of contacts I've made in Denmark and Germany on textiles and paleoenvironments, respectively. So the Marie Curie scheme is specifically designed to facilitate training in fields that will enhance future planned research. So what does this mean in practical terms, in concrete terms? What will I concentrate on? Well, first, remote sensing and cloud-based geoprocessing. So I'm interested in developing my skills and in developing some computational skills for landscape categorization from remote sensing sources such as Google Earth Engine. And of course, other people in the group will know that there's lots of applications for this kind of geoprocessing, but I think it could also have some quite important implications for characterizing landscapes, for understanding yarnscapes, textile industries. Second, spatial and functional analysis of landscape morphology in relation to textile industries. And so this includes things like my fieldwork survey in the Milesian Peninsula in Turkey, where we're investigating these linear features and various archaeological surface distributions on the peninsula to try to understand their purpose and their relationship to the famous textile industry. The city of Miletus, the classical city of Miletus, is reported to have had in the first millennium BC. Third is paleoenvironmental analysis. So I want to do some training in decoding and interpreting paleoenvironmental proxies in order to be able to identify the indicators for ancient fiber production. And fourth and finally, ethnographic and comparative research. So this is aimed to conceptualize yarn production regimes in the past and compare different traditions in different parts of the world. So what are the requirements socially as well as practically of the early silk in China, or early cotton in South Asia, or early wool in the Near East? Early wool, of course, is one of the ones that's been studied most, and so on. So obviously this project is quite exploratory in nature with methods in development. And finally, I just wanted to briefly explain the project name Yarnscape itself, which actually emphasizes the double meaning of the word yarn. Yarn is the structured thread made from fibers of different types, which are used to make textiles. But a yarn in English is also a story or a narrative. A good yarn is a good story. And we need to find new yarns of the past. They're not just the same evolutionary stories we've been telling for 150 years. And materials like textiles may well be the way to do that. So the ultimate aim of the project is to find concrete new methods, new ways of thinking about the entwined history of textile yarn and landscape. So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions arising if I can. Everyone is speechless. What is he doing?
You just impressed them.
Can I just make a comment? Just looking at your presentation, it also reminded me a lot of the problems in studying basketry, which is another perishable resource, and there must be many similarities also on the designs of the basketry. I don't know if these would go hand in hand with the textiles and could be another proxy to investigate this.
Yeah, in fact, many baskets were probably filled with textiles.
Not filled, maybe on the base while they were being constructed. So there are some impressions, or also on pottery, some impressions perhaps of textiles when they were being made.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the overlap between the categories of textiles, baskets, and pots is quite interesting because, as you say, you often see patterns on textiles. Patterns on pottery which are very textile-like, but of course they could be very basket-like. And at different times, you also see cloth being used to manufacture pottery as well. So there's all sorts of weird overlaps, which, I mean, we tend to study these things in isolation, but of course they're not. They were never produced in isolation. So yeah, there's some parallel.
And just to take advantage, and I'm not sure if you know it because it's still, I don't think it's published. There is the work of the PhD work of an ex-student of mine. She finished in 2019. Her name is Mila Andonova, and her PhD was exactly on basketry from the Aegean, prehistoric Aegean and the Balkan Peninsula. The PhD was from Nottingham University, so I'm sure, because everything is open access in a way, unpublished. But if you're interested, I can ask her for a copy of the PhD. But that would be quite interesting.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it'd be fascinating. Be interested. Yeah.
But no, I think your work has amazing potential also for bioarchaeology and for what I do, because how better to understand the plantscapes as well. Because for us, one thing that has been very difficult to find is flax. Because archaeobotanically, flax, when it is processed to become yarn, it does not require the use of fire. So, especially in the Mediterranean, of water. But in the Mediterranean, we have extremely few waterlogged areas. So we have in the Aegean, we have extremely few linum finds preserved by fire. So this was always a question I had. How extensive was in the Eastern Mediterranean? Do you know anything about it, about the use of linum, or because it's very elusive?
In Spain, during the Roman period, we have several big pools for giant treatment, but the problem is that they are very difficult to identify. How do you know they are used only for yarn or for yarn?
For flax, I don't know.
Yeah, for flax.
Yeah, I mean, I've come across the same kind of. I mean, essentially, there's not an awful lot done on it, and I guess that comes from the same sort of lack of preservation problem again. That we tend to end up focusing just on things we can find, right?
Yes.
Which inevitably distorts the field altogether. I mean, the place probably where it would be most interesting and we might get the most information is probably Egypt.
Yes.
Where we get preservation for other reasons. So, I mean, I don't have any concrete answers for you, but I think that would be the place to look to begin with.
No, but I do think that your research will really be a milestone for us, at least. It will be extremely useful.
Is there a question or something in the thingy?
There are some questions by Alfredo. I don't know if you can see at the chat, Toby, or maybe Hector can read it out.
Yes, I think he can.
For the rest of the people.
No, everybody has access to the chat.
Okay, so shall I read? So, Alfredo, you've asked how you integrate hydroclimatic variability during the late Holocene. You could ask me questions before I can, like how to run before you can walk, I would say. But I would be interested to know. Yeah, I mean, this is something I need to investigate, essentially. I can't give you any concrete answers. Where do you expect to find paleoenvironmental records, e.g. for pollen in natural deposits, e.g. lakes, or rather in structures, irrigation channels. I guess this, so I mean, the idea really is to start to ask the question, where will we find the answers? And I don't know where we will find the answers yet. Specifically in the case study in the Milesian Peninsula, there have been paleoenvironmental studies done from the Baffa Gulu Lake, which is very close to the peninsula. There are also channels on the peninsula as well which have never been investigated. It'd be interesting to do that. I don't know how feasible it is. I guess potentially both. Yeah. And what was the final comment? It'd be highly interesting to integrate soilscapes because we can easily identify agricultural irrigated parcels. Yeah, definitely. That would be interesting. Yeah.
I think, Toby, what you're doing with your research, in a way, you start a whole new discipline.
Yeah, I mean, I feel slightly nervous because, I mean, in many ways, these are not my fields, but I feel like it's important to start asking the questions of them, and people who know better than me in the different subjects can say, well, you're mad, you can't possibly answer this, or oh, actually, yes, that could be interesting to follow that up. So if it has that effect, then that's the important bit. I hope that answered some questions, Alfred. I'm not sure I really did. But why Marie Curie? I guess Marie Curie, for this purpose, is the training program. So I guess best way to answer is, going back to what I've just said in a way, which is that being able to do these different things requires a kind of control over fields which most people are highly specialized within, and which I'm not. Some of these I'm not. I mean, particularly environmental ones. What I want to be able to do is get a grip on it to the extent that it might be something that could expand to a larger project at some point in the future, which would obviously involve different people. So if that answers your question, as far as why the Marie Curie program as opposed to any other.
I should also say that while Toby's Marie Curie is it's independent research, it's within a very large landscape group, and we have started working with Paleoenvironment in collaboration with Anna Harke, which is in the CNRS, in terms of Paleoenvironment in different areas of the Mediterranean. Okay, at some point we wanted to move also to Anatolia with Toby and try to get some records from there. I mean, the circumstances at the moment are not the best to do that, but at some point I remember we were identifying lots of very adequate areas for paleoenvironmental, to get good records, to extract good paleoenvironmental records. I think this research will go beyond the Marie Curie, and eventually we will be able to collaborate in a much larger scale and get paleoenvironmental data of these areas in which it is possible. It's also true there's lots of things to test. I think ancient canals have lots of potential, and some of the techniques Toby has been working on are very much able to identify long distance channels, and with the morphology can also help us very much in identifying to what use were they put to. And I think these sediments would at some point, it would not be an amazing long-term record, but it would be focused on the period in which the channel is in use. So perhaps we could extract some paleoenvironmental data from this. So lots of potential. Toby, you have also this question about how you might visualize your textile networks by Owen Morris.
Do you mean it's a bit difficult to sort of ask the question back in a way? So I'm sort of interpreting. So sorry if I misunderstand your question. If you're talking about the networks that I was looking at from the PhD project in particular, I spent a long time thinking about the best way to visualize them. Now, one of the ways, the main way that I was trying to visualize networks in the context of that project was essentially cost distance techniques. And there are certainly other ways one could think about it. And in particular, one thing which I didn't have a chance to do, but I think would be interesting to do if anyone ever had the time to do, which is that we have, certainly in the second millennium BC, we have a huge expansion of painted pottery. This painted pottery often has very, as I said earlier, it has this textile inspired designs on it. And it would be interesting to consider these pottery networks, because of course we find similar kind of pots in different sites, adjacent sites and so on. And instead of looking at them as pots, think of them as sort of fossilized imprints of textiles which are circulating in the same networks. So that would be something that would be very interesting to do, and of course you could visualize that in various different ways.
Yeah, there's a more specific question. It meant the question was meant in terms of network approaches to archaeology, software, spatially, trade versus object-based. A bit more technical.
Okay, in terms of software, I mean, as I say, I've not analyzed it from a network point of view. I mean, there are lots of different network analysis softwares out there. Depends on what your particular questions would be.
I mean, part of what motivated this project was a side project that Toby and I, with some other people in Cambridge, were working on about long distance trade routes, which we try to analyze using multi-temporal seasonal cost corridors, which are probabilistic in their nature. So this can be used to reflect a potential statistically significant network of movement. Okay, this network of movement can be modified. It will give you different results depending on the type of product you use and the area you want to analyze. So this is still very experimental, but in reality what it consists is a surface of possibility of movement in specific seasons for a specific types of material culture. Okay, but this is still not published, and it would look similar to normal cost corridors, isn't it, Toby? And yeah, for this we use multi-temporal satellite data, loads of it, and some algorithms like the Knight's Move and the combination of other types of analysis, and of course, lots of ethnographic data. Not enough. We still need more to be able to publish it properly. But yeah, I don't know if that's if that can help.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as Hector's explaining, I mean, essentially, although we talk about it in terms of networks, the cost corridor stuff is actually trying to move a little bit away from network analysis and what you often see it visualized as dots with lines between. I mean, obviously that is still there in the background, but what we were trying to do is find, obviously, the thing with movements of materials over long periods of time is that they don't stay in the same place. I mean, you obviously there may be a road, but in most periods in history there was not a single road. There were lots of possible different ways you could go, and so concentrating on probability, as Hector just said, is the interesting way to go with that. So I'm still not sure if I've answered your question, but.
Okay, Toby, I think if there's no more questions, thank you very much for such an interesting talk. And
thanks very much. Thanks everyone for coming and for your questions and so on.
Okay.
There is another question.
And there's another question?
Just popped up.
Oh, okay. I'll try to find it. Yes, true.
Water management.
Maybe you can read the question, so later on in the video we can.
Yes, shall I read it? So Graham said, your points about water management are well made. It's often noted that medieval monasteries in England developed sophisticated techniques of water management. I wonder if this was reflected in the Middle East. I mean, there's definitely, the most famous example of water management is the Qanat system in Iran, of course. I don't know if you know about that, but there's these very long canals, underground pipelines, basically from the mountains brought down to places where they wanted to cultivate. So there's certainly parallels. Whether that similar kind of things happen in the Bronze Age is a bit. I mean, the Qanat system is indeed medieval rather than looking at the periods I'm particularly interested in, but it's certainly something to think about more.
Thank you everybody for participation, and thank you Tavi for this amazing webinar. I think, okay, now another question, just
No, just thank yous.
Okay, just thank yous. Okay, yeah.